So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists tonight. So Aaron, I'll ask you to unmute yourself so that when you say hello, then we will see you. Aaron is a public sector employee in South Australia. He's a law student, he's a dad, he's a person with lived experience of borderline personality disorder, he's an advocate, and he's a public speaker. And I'll just ask you, Aaron, to say hello.
Hi everyone. All those things. It's very tricky to manage, but I try somehow. Don't know how, but I get there. Looking really forward to this evening and hearing from all of you. I hope you can take something away from this. So thank you.
I might get you to watch your microphone there, Aaron. It might be better without it because that wasn't very clear for me then.
Oh, I'll try changing the settings and see how I go.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I'm going to move on to Carissa. Carissa Wright is a Cert 4 peer support student, a BPD peer support group facilitator. She set up her own group for BPD, and a writer for the mental health website The Mighty, which is a great resource. I've enjoyed reading different perspectives that are on that website. And as an ex-journo, I'm going to say Carissa's a really good writer, and she's a lived experience speaker as well. So I'll get you to say hi, Carissa.
Hello everyone, thanks for having me here. And I graduated from TAFE yesterday, so I'm a qualified peer support worker now. So
woohoo!
That was good timing.
Sorry?
I said it was good timing. But yeah, thanks for having me anyway.
That's great. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. And our third lived experience speaker tonight is Cassie Choo. Cassie is an occupational therapist. She's a peer community worker in a not-for-profit or a non-government organisation. And she's a consumer representative on mental health committees and advisory groups. And I'll get you to say hi as well, Cassie.
Yes, hi everyone. It's really good to be here tonight, and I look forward to the chat that comes up.
Yep. Great. Okay. And Carolyn, I don't believe, is on board yet, but she's a DBT clinician who will be talking tonight. And I'd want to introduce Kylie Hayes, who is one of our administrators. The National Education Alliance for BPD in Australia only has 2 employees. The rest of it is done with volunteers. So when you email asking about the Family Connections groups or any of the other things that we're doing, either Kylie or Mary Cantrell will be answering your emails. So Kylie, do you want to say hi?
Hi everyone. Sorry, I don't have my video on, but yeah, I look forward to hearing from you all.
Great. And I'll just get the steering committee that are on to say hello as well. So well, Perry Hoffman's here. I don't think she had her video running either, but do you want to say hi, Perry?
Yes, hello, and I'm very impressed already and excited to hear these speakers.
And Karen Brooks. So Karen's a carer peer who's a Family Connections leader facilitator as well. Are you there?
I'm here. Yep. Hi.
The old unmuting is a challenge, isn't it? And Liz Hodgman in South Australia, who's also a carer peer and a Family Connections leader as well.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
So, Liz was the star of our last webinar, which is really well worth watching if you get a chance, along with her son, Jake. And I don't know that Terry Lee's on because she was calling in on her car, but if you're listening, Terry Lee, hello and thank you. Terry Lee's based in Victoria, and Sian Jeffries in WA and Turud Hotwood in Tasmania. Anyway, so let's get started. I'll get the rest of us to mute ourselves. So Cassie, I was reading your little bio that was sent out to everybody, and you were saying that you're really passionate about getting the message out there that people can and do recover. And I was just wondering if you could tell us, what has helped you the most in your recovery journey.
Yeah, sure. So I was diagnosed with BPD about 6 years ago, but I was having issues like mental health issues before the diagnosis. And I guess I believe really strongly in the promotion of mental health recovery with people with BPD, because during that journey, I've heard clinicians and some other people go like, it's a lifelong condition and people with BPD don't recover. And that's not true at all. There are many people who do that. And there's been a few things that have helped in my mental health recovery journey. One of them is having something to work towards and having a goal. That has been really important. So developing that routine and having something in place. So throughout sort of my journey, I've continued studying towards becoming an occupational therapist. And even though that took me longer than the 4 years, so it took me 6 years with going part-time when I was unwell with BPD, but having that something to work towards really helped me to have that routine of, going out of the house and socializing and studying. And then my goal when I studied occupational therapy was to work in mental health. And so getting that job in mental health as a peer community worker has been really good for me. I've been in my role for almost 2 years now. And in that role, I'm able to use both my OT degree and my lived experience to support others who may be going through their mental health recovery journey. And in addition to that, I think support has been really important as well. Both like natural supports, such as my partner and my best friend, and professional supports as well. So in terms of professional support, I've throughout my journey, I've been through, so I did 6 months of the DBT program. That was with Carolyn actually, as the DBT therapist. So that was through Alma Street. And I continue to have a case manager through Alma Street and a doctor. And that has been really helpful to just have someone to check in with me. So if things aren't going well, there's a point of contact that I can go to that can support me, whether that be sort of seeing me more often or if necessary, an inpatient admission, just to have a bit of a break and get that extra support. Also having my partner as well. So I've recently this year got married, and having him there to be able to offer me that support. If things aren't going well, he'll encourage me to talk about it with him, and having that someone who's not judgmental. So even though he doesn't have personal experience with mental health issues, he's been really open to learning about it and been really open to learning about me and finding out how to best support me when I'm experiencing a crisis or when I'm not doing very well in my BPD.
One of the things that struck me with the way that you've all described your experiences was that you've had mental health experiences earlier than your diagnosis.
Yeah.
And how important was getting that diagnosis?
I guess it's like 50-50. Part of it with the diagnosis, it can be helpful in that it opens up doors for therapies like DBT, where one of the criteria is that you have to have a diagnosis of BPD to access that full year of weekly group therapy and weekly one-on-one therapy. And it was also helpful in terms of understanding myself. So when I got that diagnosis, being able to look at the criteria and understand, oh, this is why I've reacted the way that I have. This is why I've been going through the difficulties, and have a name for it. And also being able to then connect with, sort of read other people's stories who've gone through BPD and know that I'm not alone. So that's been helpful in terms of having a diagnosis. The difficult part of having a diagnosis is then there are some people who judge based on the diagnosis. So an example is when I was in an emergency department, I've heard a doctor say that, it's a lifelong condition, and there's been times when it's been harder to then get, when I've needed a hospital admission, to then be given that hospital admission, because some clinicians think that people with BPD shouldn't be in hospital. So in terms of that, that has been the difficult thing about getting a diagnosis. So it's kind of, there's both good and bad about it.
Yeah, and that must have made a difference when you had a regular case manager, did it? That you having, anyway, sorry, I'll leave that question for later. I might just throw to Carissa as well, because just on the basis of something that you said then, Cassie, which is about being able to read the stories of other people with BPD. You know, Carissa, you also identified as having BPD since you were 15. Did you get the diagnosis at that time, or you know, did you sort of have to meander through the mental health system for a while?
Yeah, I was hospitalised at 17 after my first suicide attempt. Just looking back, and obviously kind of going from childhood to my development into adulthood, I definitely displayed behaviours of BPD when I was around 15, like the hypersensitivity, not being able to regulate when I was really upset, and coming from a trauma background as well. I could definitely see there was definitely some symptoms there. I think early diagnosis is important. It would have been important for me, but as I want to just say that everyone's experience is different. I personally believe early diagnosis and early intervention is important, merely because the earlier the diagnosis is managed, the more skills that you can learn and like rewire the brain and stuff like that. Just so further along, when you're starting into your adulthood, you can self-manage. Because when you go from 17, like leaving high school and that big gap of going into your 20s and stuff, I don't think I was the only one who was completely lost in that path and not knowing where to go and stuff like that. And I believe that when you are diagnosed at an early age, that the support is really important as well, not just for me, but to have your family, friends involved, and just that early education. So I think in hindsight, I would have definitely loved to have had an early diagnosis. And I think the delivery clinicians should be a bit more thoughtful as well when you're delivering that diagnosis to someone. When I was 17, receiving that in a psychiatric ward, after I was in hospital, I was completely overwhelmed, and my mother was present as well. And just the way that the psychiatrist delivered that, it was really dry. It was like there was a whole stigma to it, which I'm sure anyone who's been in the mental health system back 13 years ago would definitely relate to what I'm saying. I think that in the delivery of giving the diagnosis, you need to be quite gentle with it as well, and kind of just reassure someone that it's actually okay to have this diagnosis, that it is, obviously the symptoms are quite confronting. So I think to have that a bit more mindfulness when delivering that would be super important as well.
I mean, generally, is that sort of whole emergency department experience is something in your advocacy? Is that something that you're working on?
Definitely. I've navigated Western Australia's mental health system for 13 years. Obviously, I haven't been hospitalised since August last year, as I've done the whole DBT course now, which I know some people that have BPD don't always like it, but it saved my life.
The diagnosis saved your life? Yeah,
it saved my life, yeah. I advocate now for my friends that I support when they're in emergency departments, and it is improving, but there's still a lot of stigma, discrimination. I had a paramedic call the person I was looking after in emergency department, said they had split personality when I had said that they had BPD about 5 times to this paramedic, but due to the lack of education, he just thought it was the same thing. I think I advocate a lot now. I've on a project with Cassie with we want an alternative to emergency departments. So there's a safe space cafe coming to WA next year. So there's a lot of people working behind the scenes, not just me advocating, but there's heaps happening in WA at the moment. So I'm excited to see where that goes as well.
So the Safe Space Cafe, can you just give us a little introduction to what that is?
So there was about 8 to 10 of us co-designed a program for a year. We're just waiting for the funding to come through from the Commission. but we have the cafe and it's going to be open sometime next year. It's all a bit just here and there at the moment, but it's definitely happening. And we all came together and decided that to declog emergency departments here in Perth, we needed like a peer support based, like central safe space where people with BPD or any complex mental illness could come to and have that conversation that you're not going to get in an emergency department.
So is that a place that's close to an emergency department in the hospital or completely separate from the hospital?
Yeah, it's near Sir Charles Gardner Hospital in Western Australia. So it's quite, I think, I don't know, Cassie Choo?
Yeah, it's going to be in Shenton Park, so quite close to, Sir Charles Gardner Hospital.
But the idea is that, you know, like an emergency department nurse could say, look, I know you're really distressed and we want to be able to get to you, but, you know, we've got ambulances backed up or something. Would you like to go to this space?
Yeah, obviously if they presented with self-harm injuries, they will have to be looked after at hospital. But if they're just distressed and having suicide ideation, we're hoping that people will send them there just to have that safe conversation with someone who actually understands. Because obviously going to emergency department, not everyone's trained and educated in responding to borderline personality disorder, or I don't even think that's the only one that they're not really educated in responding to, but there's going to be a big change, so I'm quite excited to see that happen.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So yeah, that's a really positive move forward. That was a little surprise for me, actually. I wasn't across that one. I'm just going to flick to Aaron, just hoping that his mic's working now. And
I've
Aaron,
actually got a handheld mic now. Is that?
We've got our own radio DJ.
Not too loud?
No, it's great. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. So you've been, I think you had 22 years with the diagnosis, did you say?
Yeah, 23 years.
Yeah, so you've got a historic view.
Yeah, I was 14 when I was first labelled with BPD. There wasn't much known about it back then, but I had a pretty skilled psychiatrist because he labelled me at 14 and it was confirmed when I hit 17. So I'm not sure what he saw that other professionals didn't, because I had a lot of professionals that refused to believe that diagnosis and said it was a wastebasket diagnosis, and treated me accordingly. I identify with what Cassie was saying with the hospital trips, and just not many emergency professionals are aware of what BPD is, let alone have the sensitivity around dealing with someone who presents with self-harm. So I think that's a really big important thing that needs to change, or more education needs to go into. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking about being diagnosed at 14, 22 years ago. That's almost, you know, that's a very rare experience, I imagine.
It was, because it wasn't just the diagnosis, but it was also my home life as well. It was very unstable. My parents were divorced when I was quite young, and that affected me a lot. I started self-harming when I was 13, and it was a very traumatic time. So over time, it just got worse and worse, and because not a lot was known about it, I would actually get admitted to hospital frequently, and I'd spend periods of up to a couple of days to 2 to 3 weeks on psychiatric wards, both child and adult, because there wasn't really a huge child function down here in Adelaide, except for a ward known as Boylan Ward at the Women's and Children's. So I was going between schooling and hospital. So I'd spend a few weeks in hospital, then I'd try and go back to school, and something bad had happened to go back to hospital. It was a revolving door. In the end, when I was about 15, my parents, they relinquished their care of me, so I actually got taken to court and said, we can't deal with him, we can no longer care for him. I remember the judge sitting there in his chambers, and he said to me, Aaron, I think this is crap. What do you want to happen? And me being the unstable 15-year-old, it's a lot to put on a kid. I said, I don't feel safe with myself. And after that, he granted the order. So I ended up in government residential care facilities for kids with quite aggressive problems that didn't reflect my own. I tried a few foster homes, but they always failed when the cutting and self-harm started. So that was really hard to deal with. So it wasn't just the diagnosis in that sense. It was all my home life, and it was always stressful. I never knew where I was staying. It was never long-term. That the accommodation places, there was an assessment unit that I stayed in for about 6 months to a year, I think. And they assess your behaviour and see where you need to fit in, because there was a group of models of government facilities. You had one section which was dealt with aggressive type issues, and another that dealt with behavioural type issues. So I ended up going to the behavioural unit, of course, and that was like a mini prison for kids. It was quite disturbing. It was really difficult to live with, but yeah, I tried the best I could. Sometimes I still don't know how I'm alive. There's a lot to go through. That's not making myself sound any worse than anyone else with BPD. I understand it's a very individual disorder, and I think that's what's forgotten is psychiatry likes to herd people and categorise them into certain groups. You can give medication, say, see you later, come back for some more when you need it. But that's not how the disorder works, and I think that scares a lot of mental health professionals, is that it is so individual and it can't be herded.
And that makes it hard to diagnose. So, I mean, you know, it's an incredibly difficult story, and as you say, it's amazing that you were able to come through that, let alone hold down employment, be studying, and doing all of those things. So,
I mean, all that stuff came much later. I was quite unstable until I hit about 27, 28. And then it was pretty much just day by day. I got to the point where my stress levels were that intolerable. I said, I'm sick of living like this. I'm sick of self-harm. I'm sick of everything like that. And I wanted to change. I genuinely wanted to change. And I think that needs to be a point in someone with BPD where they are fed up with everything. I mean, it's easy to be upset about the self-harm and stuff, but until you actually look at the core issues, things like stress management and emotional regulation and things like that, you can get stuck in a cycle and a loop, and it's really hard to get out of, because it's almost like a self-destructive cycle. You want to get better, you think you're doing okay, so you stop trying with the emotional regulation type stuff.
So what was the you know, so the turning point was obviously deeply personal, and where did you go for help? You know, once you'd reached that personal point of, I have to make something work, what help did you get at that point?
I was first introduced to DBT in 2010, and I'd read a bit about it, and I went in, when I was first accepted onto that program, I went in not that very serious about it. I think everyone who's done DBT may have had their doubts initially, just because they're so used to the lifestyle that they live. But I actually sat and listened and was quite intrigued by some of the core strategies that they teach you, like mindfulness and interpersonal relationships. And I actually started listening to it, and I tried to do the homework. I mean, I wasn't perfect, because you get given homework and you have to fill it in, and you pretty much go back to the group and you discuss how your week's been and whatnot. So I did that for 10 weeks, and I noticed an improvement in my mood, and I was just thinking, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe this doesn't really work. But I just kept trying to do the homework and practice, because it's very easy to forget some of the topics. And I ended up doing DBT again in 2016, just because I'd had a bit of a pitfall and needed to pick up. They do have refresher courses, so I did a full round of DBT again, and was given a lot of handouts and workbooks, which is really handy because I still keep them. I wasn't given them in the first one. So every time I'm struggling in an area, I can go back to the book and go, hey, I can try these things and try and do this. That can really help. So I really believe in handing out literature that you can go back to and read, because it is very easy to forget.
Yeah, and there are websites that have videos and stuff around it too for people that are more visual as well.
I think visual learning is a huge element of DBT as well. It's not just reading all the material and stuff. It's seeing how someone speaks and their tone of voice. Tone of voice is very important. It's very hard to gauge sometimes for someone with BPD, the way someone means something, and you learn about all that stuff.
Mm.
It seems very basic, but it's really intriguing once you get interested in that sort of therapy. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, sorry, I'll try to talk a bit louder, Lisa. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. What we might be able to do is when we put the video up, there might be a way that we can put subtitles on. Says Jenny, overcommitting us yet again, but we can always try. I just wanted to. So DBT is fantastic, but obviously wait lists are an issue. And Carissa, you've set up a peer support group for people. You know, until they can get past that wait list. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what, you know, sort of what advice you'd give people looking to help for themselves or their loved one?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I was studying my Cert 4 in peer work this year, and we got introduced to skills of group facilitation or facilitating, and I just took to it. I found my niche. I really enjoyed doing the role plays in class, and I think I sat on a thought about one day I was inspired to maybe start my own peer support group, but I just thought, like, I've got a lot of friends close to me that have BPD and they're still on wait lists for DBT and other therapies that is suiting their diagnosis, and I just put a message out there on social media, and I said, hey, if I started this thing, would people be interested in coming? I have 20 people come to my group each Wednesday night, except for tonight. And it's my 10th session next week. So it's an introduction to DBT skills, but I don't label it DBT because with the module, it's so intensive that I picked some things out that I thought were quite simple just to teach anyone really, if they have a diagnosis of BPD or not. I've had some people in the group that have done DBT before, but we kind of just put our own spin on it. And the 20 people that come each week, we just share like safe coping mechanisms with each other. It's honestly like having a dinner with friends sometimes. So it's peer support based, so there's no clinical aspect to it. Obviously very boundary though as well, just for my own safety. And it's been great so far. Like I haven't had anything drastic happen, or everyone's always asked me like, oh, how do you facilitate that by yourself? And so I just put it out there, and I wanted to use my initiative and make that change because I know when I was in crisis, I didn't have any like peer support or anything I could go to like that. And I feel like back then that would have helped me when I was in isolation. And I can see it's helping other people. So my advice would be is to attend peer support groups. If you do have a loved one with BPD and you want to learn more, but go to peer support based groups if you do have any in your areas where you are around the world or Australia. Because if the more that you work as a unit, the more you can kind of navigate the recovery. Like obviously recovery isn't linear, so there is going to be times of relapse and crisis, but going to these groups and listening to other people's perspectives of BPD and how they cope, you learn a whole lot. Like I'm very far in my recovery, but I've learned a lot from the people that aren't as far as me that come to group. So yeah, it's like a ripple effect. It's just positive. I think view behaviours as behaviours, not as a personal choice. I feel like when you're in crisis, obviously due to not being able to regulate properly, they're behaviours that aren't intentionally meaning to be malicious or hurt people. And I think people really need to start recognising that when crises occur. Validating, obviously, being like, yeah, I can understand that. Using effective language when someone's trying to say how they're feeling with their BPD or just feeling in general. It's quite easy to just say, hey, I might not have experienced that, but I can understand or relate to it in some way or another. And just reflective listening. I think boundaries are super important. I learned that in DBT, especially with yourself. I know what to share and not what to share, and I try to show that and model that in all the work I do. So I'm hoping that people that come to my group or meet me in general know how important it is for that, just for your own self-care. I never had them in place. Back in the 13 years I was navigating the system, and I think due to not having those boundaries, I was quite lucky to still be here, because there was times that I was put in positions where I was very unsafe just because of the lack of boundaries I had. And gentle kindness, and this is effective because it helps people regulate. When you're all like at stress level because you feel like you're pretty much on fire, if someone just gently approaches you and just calmly approaches you, it helps you, the anxiety just go down a little bit more. And yeah, that's just some tips that I've got.
So I'm curious about which were the modules, you know, like what you've pulled out of DBT first. I mean, I always love the mindfulness and validation. I think they're the two skills, you know, the family connections. If people walk away, those are the two skills that you want them to have.
Yeah.
What are the ones that, from your perspective, are the two skills you would want people to have?
I think just having the relationship with yourself. So I've come from a background where I've been in quite codependent relationships. So the interpersonal effectiveness from my peer group is what I want people to go away and realise, that the behaviours they have during breakups or in any relationship they have, I want them to accept that you're still human at the end of the day, and it's not your fault if you haven't got the skills that other people do in DBT and stuff like that, and just to work towards that and work towards that acceptance of yourself. So that's one thing I want, just people to be more comfortable with who they are and be honest with themselves as well. But obviously DBT is not for everyone, and my peer group isn't just DBT based, it's more just having a relationship with yourself, but also making connections with other people. So I want people to feel connected, validated, feel accepted. And feel grounded in themselves, and know that it might look really bad right now, but it does get better with just small steps.
Oh, you're a fantastic example of that. No, really great work you're doing. Cassie, in the last webinar we had people asking about family therapy as an option. Is that something that you or your peers have experienced?
Personally, I haven't experienced family therapy, but I think it might have been helpful in relation to family, like for my parents, possibly having that greater understanding of BPD might have been helpful. For me in particular, they're not very understanding of mental health issues, and when I would like self-harm or when I would be in hospital, they'd be quite blaming and sort of ask me like, why am I doing this? And it wouldn't be very helpful. So in that respect, it might have been helpful to have family therapy. And in relation to that psychoeducation as well, even though it's not family therapy, when I was inpatient for an eating disorder, my partner did attend like a family psychoeducation session about eating disorders. And I think that was helpful for him to be able to connect with other carers or other family members or supporters who have their loved one or someone they care about going through that, and also to learn a bit more about something that he might not otherwise know a lot about.
Great, that's awesome. Because obviously I'm going to put a plug in here for the Family Connections, which is obviously some people on the webinar will have done the Family Connections course or are going to be doing it, or maybe wondering about it. I think one of the most powerful things about it is that people get to skill themselves up and to work on themselves, and that improves their relationship with somebody, and it becomes kind of a mutual responsibility then, I think, which is because, I can see the chat sort of coming up, and I'm not looking closely at the questions, but there's a lot about how do you get someone into DBT. Well, you can't, but you can get your own skills, which will, if you model changing your behaviour through going to therapy, it makes therapy a lot more appealing for people, don't you think?
Yeah, and DBT for me personally, I know a lot of people. DBT has been very helpful. For me, though, sort of some aspects was helpful for me. It wasn't what was instrumental in my recovery. And I think the research has shown that even though DBT has the evidence base, it's the therapeutic relationship between the client and the therapist that has had the most benefit. So for me, when I've been to like a psychologist, having that someone supportive that I could go to, who I can talk to and sets those boundaries and explores things. So I've done like schema therapy, and I found that more helpful because it explored some of the past, and it helped me to be more compassionate to myself, because it helped me to understand why I might be reacting that way, why I might be upset if I'm fearing that someone might abandon me. So for me, that therapy helped me more than sort of DBT. Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. I'm wondering if Carolyn's on yet. Has anyone?
Yes, I've been here all the time.
Excellent. Okay.
I've been listening to it all very intently.
Good. Excellent. So actually that's a perfect segue to you, because I was going to say, therapy is not a one size fits all, and Cassie's answered that really well.
So nice segue. Thanks, Cassie. So look, there's say 20 or 30 years ago, there was a real lack of hope, I think, in working and treating people with BPD. And but probably in the last good 20 years, we've got several really good therapies that are available. And I think from what people have been speaking about today, it's really important to find what works for you. Some parts will appeal and some parts will be more important at other times. You've got dialectical behaviour therapy, which we've talked a lot about today, and that's quite popular. I guess it was one of the first that really came out with a lot of evidence behind it. And when we talk about DBT, there's I guess we're sort of talking about the more formal program, which is looking at about a year-long treatment with group and individual therapy. But I do know that there are places that perhaps just run groups, or they do what we call DBT informed. I think what I like about DBT is, apart from the fact that it's got lots of research behind it, it teaches some great skills, and I think that's evident from what people have been saying today. And it's one of my favourites. It's what we run at Alma Street, and I've seen a lot of people really benefit from it. I think the other good thing about DBT is that it's been very helpful for people with issues other than BPD. So, all round it's a pretty good therapy. You've also got schema therapy, which Cassie mentioned. And again, that's another great therapy. They've got quite a lot of research for this being effective for people with borderline personality disorder. And it's looking at the longer term thinking and sort of patterns of behaviour that get in the way of life goals. And I think that in hand with DBT, from my personal experience and watching people go through it, can be quite a nice combination, because you have the skills from the DBT to deal with some of the emotional regulation and the distress that might come up, and then I guess a more individualised way of approaching some of your historical issues that keep coming up. So schema's has got a good rap. And then there's also mentalisation based therapy, which is another one, again, that has a lot of evidence. It's sort of essentially it's really looking at your thinking capacity and understanding your thinking and other people's thinking, and it's about theories of mind. So I guess, Cassie mentioned one of the things that's important is finding someone that you relate to and can connect with. I think that's very important. DBT, BPD, for borderline personality, any sort of therapy, you've got to have someone that you connect with. And I also think Aaron put it really nicely. It's when you're ready. There's sort of there gets a point where you're prepared and ready to do the work. And when you've got those two things, I think that can get the process moving a lot more quickly.
Great. That's fantastic. And, obviously that's one of our major tasks is getting family connections out there. And we've got some leaders training happening this weekend so that we can get more leaders out there, particularly carer peer ones. There's been some really nice segues, with Carissa talking about the importance of peer work, and and that's been the Family Connections model for 20 odd years now.
It's like we were practiced before we got on.
Which we so didn't. So, yeah, can you just give us a little bit of, because you've run family connections groups in Alma Street, you know, and you've had people doing DBT and their family members coming along to family connections, and you know, someone doing DBT and no family members, and some family members and no one doing DBT. How, you know, what's your experience been of that?
Look, I think that was such a lucky find. The DBT program that we've had at Alma Street's been developing since 2004, and I hate to say it, but I was there right from the get-go. So, you know, we're always looking to improve, and it was just lucky that I actually met Jenny, and then Jenny 6 months later told me she was doing this family connections, and it was just happened that at that time our team had been thinking about what can we do for our families. And I ran the first group with Jenny, and just found it really positive, and people feeling empowered, and they understood it. And the feedback that we were getting was that that the people who were seeing us for DBT and their family members who were going to family connections were talking. They were talking more. There was a mutual understanding. People had a little bit more generosity in the way that they interpreted situations that came up. It really made quite a difference. So, and I think the other thing too is that I'm sort of stuck in clinician land, and sometimes I don't think you necessarily get the perspective of the carer. And I think as a clinician, that's really opened my eyes and perhaps given me a new appreciation for how family members also need support, and how really as a group, you know, if we can work together, the outcome is better for all.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I might just flick back to Aaron and Cassie and Carissa and ask you all the same question, but I'll get you to go in turn. You know, did your families do anything like this? And if they had done anything like this, do you think it would have helped? And I'll start with you, Aaron.
Unfortunately, there weren't programs like Family Connections when I grew up with BPD. My family took a bit of a laid-back approach, I guess. They tried to believe what the psychiatrist was saying, but even they didn't really know what was wrong. I was labelled with several different diagnoses, from schizophrenia to bipolar to all sorts of different things. I was also on a lot of medication, which didn't really help. So my communication with my family was poor. It's a shame that there weren't programs like you have now with Family Connections, where there is that support for a carer or parent to guide them through it all. Because I think things would have been different if my family had been engaged in that sort of level. Don't get me wrong, I'm not bitter over that. I think it's great. I think parents and carers should be interested in their child or loved one's mental health. I think we've come a long way since I grew up with mental health, but I think everyone could say that. I try not to ruminate too much over that. I mean, my mum still is set in stone with certain ways of how she thinks, and I've just learned to accept that with time. I mean, I don't hate my mother anymore. My father passed away a few years ago, but I made peace with him before that. So you learn to communicate better with your parents once you've done DBT. I guess you learn to take the good with the bad.
Yeah. So it might have sped the process up a little bit if they'd had that, which is, you know, it is what it is, isn't it?
That's it.
Yeah. So Cassie, and you sort of talked a little bit to this, but can I?
Yeah, I think I sort of mentioned some of it before. I think it would have been helpful for my parents to have that psychoeducation about BPD. I think, but also there's that difficulty of coming from an Asian background. My mum wasn't that great at English, so that would have been a difficulty in that as well. But having that understanding, if they had that understanding of BPD and how to support me and how to validate me instead of blaming me, I think that would have been really helpful.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm just watching time here, so I'm going to rush through. But yeah, that certainly would have been another barrier for you, Cassie. And Carissa, for you, how are things with your family now? Or you know.
I actually come from a bit of a complex background. So when I got diagnosed, my parents had split up a year before. So my family dynamic completely changed. My mum tried to support me, but I think as a parent, you have such a guilt when these things happen to your child and you feel responsible. So in hindsight, I think probably yes, or even if my mum had more resources and education around the diagnosis back then, it would have helped her. However, I navigated a lot of my journey by myself in the last 4 years. When I started writing, it actually brought me and my mum closer, because I don't have any support from my dad really. We talk, but just don't have that emotional support. But my mum's so understanding now, and she's a genuinely beautiful person, but she just blamed herself. And she just was scared, and I think she froze a bit. But I think, yeah, having what you guys do now would have definitely benefited a parent similar to my mum, who just didn't know where to go or what to do, kind of thing.
Really wanted that support. Thank you so much, Carissa.
That's all right.
Yeah. Karen, we've got 10 minutes to go, and we were going to see if there's any. I haven't really been watching the chat too much because it's a little distracting, but have we got any questions that are outstanding that we haven't asked?
Okay, so most of the speakers have answered most of the questions. I suppose there's a couple of things that point out. There are some questions about medications and how helpful are medications, and there's comments about the long waiting lists and how do people access DBT in various states.
Okay. We'll go to medication, I think, first. So, Carissa, as you're unmuted, I'm going to go to you first. Was medication a factor in in either helping or hindering your recovery? Well, certainly, I mean, even just speaking from your peer experience, because you know, obviously you're getting feedback from loads of different areas.
I think I don't want to ever invalidate medication, as I know people that have complex mental illnesses helped them. Just for me, in the aspect of BPD having such an impulsive nature to the diagnosis and really unsafe coping mechanisms, it definitely hindered my recovery. And it was the first option that I was put on at 17. I was not offered peer support. I was not offered like family connections or anything like that. And I think there's a danger to that, I think, especially being at an age where you are developing or going into the adulthood stage, as I said before. I have had friends that it does help, but to me it was just a band-aid solution to all these other options that I could have had that I wanted to explore, because obviously the chronic suicide ideation you experience with BPD, I just felt it was so dangerous to have access to my medication like I did, and being on such high dosages and stuff. I was hospitalised at least 6 times when I was on meds, and yeah, I just didn't understand that I was getting prescribed this medication and the doctor was looking at me and saying, by the way, this is going to have suicide, like high suicide risk as your side effect. It just didn't make sense to me. So I'm a strong advocate in trying to advocate for yourself, and if you do notice a severe change in your mood or behaviour, like heightening your BPD, while on that, I suggest you talk to your doctor and your therapist or whoever your support network is about that and explore some other options.
Yeah. I mean, because it's not something you can just stop, is it? There's
no.
Have that medical involvement the whole way through.
Yeah.
Carolyn, I mean, at Alma Street, you guys work hand in hand with psychiatrists, and you know, a team approach.
I guess everyone's different, like Carissa said, and I think the other thing we've got to consider is that quite often, well, for some people, it's not just BPD. They may have other diagnoses as well. So it's really important that you have a good relationship with the doctor and get a really clear diagnosis, and be really informed about the medication that you're taking, understanding exactly what you're being given and what it's about, and making sure that you keep up with the checkups if medication is for you. That would be my thoughts on that. I think too we've got a medical model in mental health. So medical is the sort of the front line for various reasons, and I think sometimes that means that people who could benefit from other therapies, that gets skipped, and medication is the first stop, and that might not be the best case scenario for that person.
Yeah.
So I think if you can have a good relationship, talk, Google, get an advocate to come in with you if you need to, if you're not feeling like you're understanding your appointments and what you're being given. You know, you have the right to ask questions, and it's really important that you do that. That would be my thoughts.
Yeah. And Cassie and Aaron, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I currently am still on medication. I am on an antidepressant still. And I've been on that same medication, I think, for about 6 years or so. So I think it does help my mood. So there's been one point where when I ran out of the medication, I took myself off it. And I did notice that my mood really went downhill, and I ended up in hospital for a short while after that. So for me, I still take medication, and I think it definitely can have a role to play in treatment for BPD. I think it shouldn't be the only treatment for BPD. It definitely needs to be in conjunction with other things like psychological therapies, therapy to target like functional recovery and peer support, things like that. So I think it works in conjunction with other things.
We've only got 5 minutes, but you just mentioned functional recovery, and I think that's something that's a notion that might be new to people as well. Can you give us a 2-minute précis of that? Is that
okay? Sure. So functional recovery. So it's not just, I guess, the clinical recovery of people not experiencing any symptoms of BPD anymore. It's also that other stuff in recovery, the other stuff that makes life good. So for example, having social relationships, having friends, getting out of bed each day and having a routine, going to work, or doing an educational course or volunteering, and I guess the everyday things that makes life good and is what makes everyone. So it's not just in relation to mental illness, it's for everyone what makes life good for them, whether it be engaging with their hobbies and working towards a goal.
It's all about seeing the whole person, isn't it? Not just mental illness. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And Aaron, is there something that you would add on to that?
Personally, medication didn't work for me. I can appreciate that it helps some. Personally, though, I know I had quite ill reactions to a lot of medications, but can appreciate symptom-specific medication, as in you take something to help you calm down, occasionally and with supervision. I don't think anyone with BPD should be given boxes of medication. I think that's asking for trouble. But yeah, as I said, I appreciate medication can work for people. So I've always said, if you're taking medication, don't stop just because I say it didn't work for me. It doesn't work like that. People need to be careful with what sort of medication they're taking and make sure they study it and to notify their doctor immediately if there's any issues. So.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that the Australian National Mental Health Research Council has a BPD treatment guide, and they have formal recommendations around medication in there. And I think one of the things, well, it's worth having a look at if people are interested in that. Because one of the things is, polypharmacology is not recommended. I think they say that you should only be on 1 or 2 medications at most. But that's sorry, yeah, jump in, Carolyn, please.
So I guess the proviso is that, like I said before, quite often for some people they don't just have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. They may also have bipolar, or there could be some post-traumatic stress or some anxiety. So for BP, you need to really look at the person and the what else is going on with that.
Yeah. And the other question was about resources that are available. I think we have some stuff on our website. There's another website in Australia called the BPD Foundation, and they actually have a list of resources state by state. and that includes government, private, and probably not private, but government and non-government organisations. So I think that's just bpdfoundation.org.au. That's probably worth giving a shout out to as well. Karen, is there anything else that we've missed? You're still muted. Karen, you're muted. Hang on, I can unmute her. Okay. Karen, can you try again? Sorry.
Okay. How do you get someone to go to DBT if they don't want to go?
Go to Family Connections yourself. I don't know. Okay, we're bang on 6 o'clock, which is when we said that we would finish. So I just wanted to say, a really big thank you to Carissa and Cassie and Aaron for sharing your stories, and for Carolyn for being our resident expert, and everyone for showing up. And trust me, we will go through the chat and see what we haven't answered and look to that for our next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
And thank you to Jenny for her excellent questions and keeping us all on time. Thank you, Jenny.
the time Nazi. Okay, no, thanks a lot.
Well done, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.